Just going live. Good morning and welcome to day 2 of Voices of Strength Summit. And I am so thrilled. Yesterday was amazing. And today, well, you've got another group of men who are just forging their own paths, who are speaking with a voice of strength based on their experiences, their stories, their education, what they've learned in life. And this is the whole point of the Voices of Strength, the anthology and the summit and all the interviews that we've been doing as well. And it's something that I am passionate to keep going, creating these ripples of brilliance with these incredible human beings. And for me, it's that vulnerability, it's that strength to stand up for what's right, for what you believe in. And this is live. I thought I'd silence my phone. And yes, so without further ado, let's get day 1 started. So today we have got the wonderful, the brilliant Dr. Kevin Ward, who I'm delighted to call not just a peer, but a friend. So good morning, Kevin.
Good morning. It's a great opportunity, great to be here.
Yes, and of course, as you can hear, Kevin, you see, this is what's so great about these men. So Kevin's in America, it's 5 o'clock in the morning. That is dedication, that's commitment. That's when he says he's going to show up. He shows up, irrespective, because he's a man on a mission to make a difference, and he's got a message to share. And we're going to be finding out a bit about that today. But let me just repeat his the quote that's in the Voice of Strength book. Leadership is the actions and attitudes displayed by one individual while reaching their full potential that inspires others to reach their full potential as they both pursue a shared vision. So Kevin is also known as the wisdom seeker. I believe you have your own podcast. Yes?
Yes, I do.
Yes, you do. And he uses his ability with people to help them to find their potential for becoming servant leaders. Now, this is a term I'm hearing more and more and more. And boy, when we serve other individuals, then do we help them shine, but we too are rising and sharing our own light. So without further ado, oh my goodness, I thought I'd silenced all these. I'll be doing that in a moment. And we're going to be talking about open the box on the wounds. Now, be ready to be inspired. Be ready to witness true vulnerability, and be ready to take action after you listen to the wonderful, the brilliant Dr. Kevin Ward. Over to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Brenda. I really appreciate it. And it's exciting to be a part of this effort, because indeed, each of us is getting an opportunity to tell our story about the journey we're on, and to hopefully impact the lives of other men. Because at the end of the day, that's the primary reason we're around here, is to impact each other. And my story is a little different in some ways, and that it's addressing wounds. And one of the things that we have to realize is we're all wounded one way or another. Men, women, everyone. And we have to really begin to consider, what is that wound doing to us? And so as I looked at this, I decided, what I want to talk about in looking at opening the box on our wound is, first of all, we got to talk about what is the box. And the second thing that we need to consider is what are the wounds? And then once we've kind of gotten through that process, we really need to consider what do we do about it? And it's something that I hope by walking through this, and those that get the book and read our stories will begin to really address their wound. And so what is the box? I heard years ago from my brother and from friends about a book. And this book is Men Are Like Waffles and Women Are Like Spaghetti. And it's kind of a curious title. And we're going to focus today talking about the men's side of things. And it's maybe another day we could talk about the women's side and enlighten on that. But so Men Are Like Waffles. And I will give a little brief on the Women Are Like Spaghetti because people are very curious. But men are like waffles. And the reason we're like waffles is we have boxes in our life. And just like waffles have the little squares and boxes in the waffle, that's the way men are. We have boxes. And women, again, just a little bit about that, are like spaghetti. And if you've ever looked at spaghetti, it's hard to separate one noodle out from another. Everything touches everything else. So women, in the way you're wired, is your emotional and your experiences all touch everything. And that's why you're so good at remembering things that us men have put in the box somewhere and forgotten completely about, and are really amazed when it happens. So the box is where we put stuff. Okay. We take our emotions, especially, and we put them in these boxes. And some of them are still open, just like the waffle, and it lays in there, but one thing doesn't touch another. It is there. And when it comes time, if we feel the need to address something, we'll go look in that box and we'll deal with it a bit and then move on and about our business. And then what's really funny is that, and ladies have a hard time understanding this sometimes, and that is that as men, we have a nothing box. And so when you see us kind of staring off and looking out into the blue and ask us, well, what are you thinking about? Well, we're looking at the nothing box and we say we're not thinking of anything. And so we're not trying to be evasive or hide anything. It's just that we have a nothing box that we can stare into. And it's just a place we go sometimes for, I don't know, rest or distraction, whatever. So that we really do have one of those, and it's real. Another one of the boxes that we have is our fun box. We have a box where we have these memories and these emotions from fun times that we have had with friends, family, whatever that looks like. And there are times we'll sit back and look into that box and laugh and reminisce and maybe share. We have to be careful though, because only certain things go in that box that we can share with people, because we're pressured to, not get too emotional. And then we have our have to boxes. There are times that we have things in our life that we have to deal with. And how that looks varies from one man to the next, but we've all got those have to boxes. And at times we have to go to those boxes and give it a minute, give it an hour, whatever that looks like, to address what's going on inside of us. And then there are other boxes in our life. And these boxes are ones that over time, well, we've not only put it in the box, but we've built a lid and put the lid on it. And some of us have nailed that lid shut. We've put glue on it. We've put everything imaginable to cover that box up. And that's a box that we really prefer to pretend like it never ever existed, whatever's in that box. And the problem is, just like if you box things up, especially anything that has any living quality to it, over time, it's going to deteriorate, and it's going to, depending on what it is, it may even start smelling a bit and festering, if you will. So that's what we do. We have our boxes, and that's the way we address life, and especially our emotions. And that is the way we're wired, and that's what we do. And that can be a good thing. That can be a bad thing, but it is a thing. But the one problem is that we think that some of these boxes, that we can ignore them and they won't have any effect. It's like they don't exist. And the way that we interact with these boxes. So at moments, we want to clear our mind and not really focus on anything. And that's when we go to our nothing box, and we stare into our nothing box and we look at it, and who knows where our minds go. Quite often, it's not really going anywhere, just existing. And then the way we interact with our fun box is that that's when we're sitting around with friends on the porch or in the living room, or maybe around the break room at work, and we're talking about fun times and things. Well, that's where we keep those safe topics. Some men, that box will only be weather, sports, things that are really not very deep or very threatening to us to be able to talk about, but they're fun and we can talk about them and laugh. And then our have to boxes is ones that usually are ones we look at because they're have relational pieces, and it'll come up and we have to address it and we have to think about it and consider it. And so when we have to interact with that, we'll go there, pull out whatever's in it and look at it and talk about it. Maybe even deal with some emotional things there that may not be pleasant, but again, generally are pretty safe. And the last box, though, that is the challenge. That box, it's the box with bad memories. It's the box where we stick our emotional pain. And it's the box where when things come in our life, and as a man, we're told we have to be tougher. We have to just take life and deal with it as it comes, and not be emotional about it. We have to be stoic. And occasionally we will get into that box because we get desperate. We realize something is going on and we can't quite figure out why, and we'll go, well, maybe it has something to do with this stuff that I've got in this box. And we'll peek in. And what happens is sometimes we peek in and we've opened the box and we smell it, and it doesn't smell very good. And then we see some of this stuff and we go, uh-oh, I can't look at that, and we'll close the box back on it pretty quickly. And when we do that again, we're trying to act as if it never existed. And sometimes, though, even as well as we've sealed that box up and tightened and glued it and all that, well, just like any kind of material that breaks down and deteriorates, it will actually creep out, and it will bubble up, if you will. It will sneak out even though we don't want it to. And at that point, we have to deal with it. And we will on some level. Usually, though, it's not to open it up and deal with what's in there. We just put more glue on it or more sealer. And the problem with that box and any of the boxes is that we think as men, if it's in our box, especially if we've got it closed up and sealed off and out of sight, out of mind, it doesn't affect us. The problem is it does. Okay, though that box still is part of who we are. And if it's unresolved, it's going to impact our lives. And how it shows up, we really don't know. It could show up early and quick, and it could affect us immediately. It may not affect us for a while. It may not impact us initially, but at some point, it's going to impact us mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and even to a point of affecting our health. That is because there is something there that we've not addressed. And in some cases, most cases, it's become very toxic. And so even though we like to pretend it doesn't factor in, it does. And ultimately, if we keep that box in our life and we don't address it, it will destroy our health and relationships. And what I've found over the years in my life and in the lives of other men that I've talked to, it quite often shows up first in relationships and how we engage with other people. And so that's about our box. Men do this. We're very good at putting things in these boxes and pretending that some of them don't even exist. And that's unfortunate, and things go unresolved. So that's about the box. Like I said, men are like waffles, women are like spaghetti, and men are like waffles because it's got these nice, neat little boxes. And that's where we put our mental, emotional, spiritual stuff in to keep it apart and address it sometimes and sometimes ignore it. So the next question is, in this process, what is the wound? And the wound is something in our life that has happened. And it's something that generally is outside of our control. And it will factor in to what as part of our development. And one of the things about this wound is, generally speaking, excuse me, got a frog in my throat this morning. There is a defining moment related to this process in our life. There is something that happens that becomes kind of the picture of it. And when that happens, it locks us in. And the challenge is that generally what locks us into is the point we are in our life emotionally. That's why that we see men, excuse me, that are emotionally still at a level that maybe they were at 9 or 10, maybe teenage. But that is what drives them emotionally, is because this wound, as it processed in their life, has locked them in. And that's part of the problem that we address. And as we go along, I'm going to share a little bit about my story and my wound. And for me, my wound locked me in at an age of 13. And the other thing about this wound and the defining moment, there's a video that goes with it, or a picture. And that video or picture will be just as clear in our mind years later than as if it happened that very day. And so as men consider this wound, then quite often there will be a picture, a video that have in our mind of that defining moment, emotionally, mentally, both, whatever. Women have these wounds too, by the way. It's non-discriminatory. Uh, we're all wounded in our lives, and it's usually and as we're growing up. But we can maybe do another discussion sometime about how that affects the women's spaghetti. Excuse me. This wound, though, causes us not to react uh, based on where we are in our life at a given time. In other words, we may react. For me, I was in my 20s, and I was still reacting from that 13-year-old emotional place. And it didn't always show up in every circumstance. It was primarily during times and interacting with people that trigger it, because their attitude, their behavior, whatever, reminds us of that process, and especially that defining moment. And we will react emotionally, mentally, whatever, from that time frame. And that's why when we do this, people look at us and go, why did you react that way? That didn't fit. That wasn't appropriate to that situation. In fact, one of the phrases is, boy, you're acting like a kid. And I don't know if you've known any men or not, and you've ever observed that. Well, it may be that that's why they're doing it. They've got a wound that has locked them into being there like they are as a kid. And most of the time, we're able to take that and, again, put it aside and not address it. But there will be something, or usually someone, that will trigger it. And we will go into that 13-year-old mode, just like I did for me, or whatever age that when you were wounded, that you got locked into. And it will even be not only what would be maybe not age appropriate in that situation, but the power, the passion of that emotion when it comes out will be disproportionate. Somebody may say something that is really, by most observation, pretty innocent, and we'll react like they've slapped us in the face, or really have that powerful passion that comes out. And the result is that we overreact. We appear to be childish in our reaction in those circumstances. And what's really strange about it is we may go 90% of the time and it never show up. And we've grown in other ways, and we look pretty good, behave pretty well, but something will trigger it. I've even had a couple of men that I've worked with. I had a man that was a burly, big football player, towering over me. And I observed him one day get around a person in his life that triggered this. And I watched a man that was like 6'3", 250 pounds, revert back, and you would swear he was 15 years old. And you go, where does this come from? But it's part of this wound. So a little bit about the wound that I've had to deal with and that I write about in the book is that this goes back to my family situation. And one of the things about my family, those of you that know me or will get to know me know that one of the things about me is that I can, if it's machine or electronics, I can usually figure out how it works, why it works, and how to make it work again if it stops. And so in my family, we always doing projects in our home. We did a lot of our own remodeling and updating and whatever, worked on cars. And so my defining moment came on a day in my life when I was 13 years old. I happened to be on crutches because I'd gone with a friend canoeing and stepped on glass in the water at this lake. And so I was limited in what I could do in terms of physically helping. And we had a project going like we always did. And this project was to install some trim or molding called crown molding. And most of you know what crown molding is in your home. It goes up above at the top of the wall at the ceiling. And if you've ever tried to install it, you know that it can be a challenge. So my dad, my brother, and myself, we were there. I was trying to contribute the best I could, walking on crutches. And it came time to figure out how to cut this trim to put it together to make it work and make it look good. And my dad and my brother kept trying this and that and the other, and they couldn't get it cut in such a way that it fit right and looked good. Well, I was there and I kept telling my dad, if you'll do this way, you will get it cut right and it will work. And my dad, in usual fashion, would tell me, oh, you're young, you don't know. You know, if we can't figure it out, you certainly can't figure it out. And so I said, okay. And because I was taught to respect people as we were engaging. So I just kept watching. And every now and again, I'd still try to say, well, Dad, if you'll do this, oh, no. And so this went on for a time, and we started wasting a lot of material, cutting it and trying to figure it out. And finally, my dad came back to me and said, okay, how is it you said we should do this and that it would work? And I said, well, you believe it or not, you put the material on upside down and backwards on the saw and cut it and it will work. And so they tried it finally. I guess point of desperate, they gave it a shot. Guess what? It worked. And what was really remarkable to me, and this is what defined the impact on my life, is we all knew it worked. They started doing, they put it up, finished, and it worked and looked good. But one thing that didn't happen was my father never said, you know, you were right. You were right. And I was wrong in what I said. That never happened. And that day in my head still, I can see that video that plays of that moment. And I went, and in fact, at the time, again, I was a young man, 13, coming into my own. And so I didn't take much note of it at that moment because it's just the way life is and you go on. But what happened is that froze in time for me. And when certain circumstances happen, it would trigger that feeling. It would open that box, it'd crack it open. And at that point, when that box got cracked open, ooh, it didn't smell real good. And it didn't look real good. And my reaction was from that vantage point. And so it took me a while to realize that that wound caused me problems in relationships. And it's very unfortunate because at the time, generally speaking, when I started processing this, most people thought I was a pretty nice guy and that I was reasonable to be around and so on. But in this particular case, again, a defining moment, something that caused me to begin to ask questions, is that I had a gentleman that I worked with, and his name was Ed. And Ed and I, because we worked together, had to be together at times. Now, in our job, it worked out where it wasn't constant because we were out in the field working. But when we were together, within minutes, we were debating, discussing, even arguing something. It really didn't matter what it was, but we were going at it. And my boss, at one point, kind of laughed at us because it was so bad to a point that even if we agreed on something, we would still debate it because it wasn't, somebody had to be right, and we would debate even some things we agreed on. And I recognize this, and I would see this happen in other settings, but it seemed especially poignant with Ed. So my response in those circumstances was to be right, because I was right back when this wound occurred, but nobody ever acknowledged it. And I needed that acknowledged. And so it impacted the relationship I had with Ed, and it unfortunately impacted my work. And because I was very capable and should have received a promotion and put in a role of leadership, but I didn't get it because it was given to Ed. And so that was hard to deal with, but it was part of the result of this unresolved, undealt with wound in my life. Now, fortunately, it started a process for me as I began to realize, my boss was right. This is crazy. It's not appropriate, and there's got to be a reason for it. Plus, I'd like to have thought that I was mature and growing enough that it shouldn't be a problem. So I began to look at it, and so we'll talk a little bit more, but that's the wound that I dealt with. Each of us has a different wound, and depending on your situation, how you grew up, what was the impact that happened. And unfortunately, we live in a sad world where some of those wounds are very harsh. I was fortunate that I was not abused or misused in terms of physical abuse or anything, but some people unfortunately have to deal with those kind of wounds too. And so what your wound looks like depends on you and your life. The big thing is, as a man, I got to tell you, you've got a wound. If you're a human and you're a man, you've got a wound. And again, ladies, you have them too. But today we're talking about men. And again, maybe we'll do a talk sometime on the spaghetti. But one of the things that we have to say is, okay, so this wound is there. What do I do about it? Okay. And that becomes a real challenge, because once we finally figure out that it's there, it's not going away, and it is impacting us, we got to figure out, what are we going to do with this wound? So as I thought through this, I wanted to share a little bit about what I went through, and maybe it will be some things that will help other men to be able to address this wound. And the first part, because remember, we've put this wound in a box and we've pretended like it didn't exist and that it had no impact. So our first thing we have to do is own it. It's there, it's real. And we have to say, okay, yeah, I have this wound. It really exists, and it really does impact. And then the next part that we have to really do, and this is tough because what's in that box sometimes can be really bad, but we got to open the box. And some of us opening the box, we have been so long trying to keep it sealed up and hidden and closed, and opening it up is going to be a challenge. We may have to pry it open. We may even have to break it open, but some way you got to open up that box and look at that wound that's there. One of the things that I was very fortunate about is I had people in my life at that point that I could open up the box and they would look at it with me, and they were wiser than I was, and I had allowed them to be in a mentor role in my life. So if you're going to open this box up and address this wound, good idea to have somebody there with you. Facing it alone can be pretty scary because it goes back, and if it's been a while, it can be really, really bad. So at first, we need to own it. The second thing we need to do is open it up, but I suggest that We do this with someone with us that can offer perspective, someone that is a mentor and has more wisdom than we do. One of the things that I suggest, because most of the time these wounds originate with our family, and depending on what your family situation, you may be and still be friends and close to your family, but there's still that wound. And most of the time, it's somebody in your family that is the source of that wound. And quite often, it is related to one of our parents. And that's as much as anything because they are parents and they're the ones that are responsible and have to be in charge. So as we look at this wound, at some point, we need to include them as part of this exploration. And I remember going to my parents. I was very fortunate that they were still alive and that I could even have this conversation with them. But I said, look, I've discovered something and I want to share with you what I have discovered. And what's really in my case, and quite often is the people in our family that were a part of this have no clue. Because generally speaking, they didn't set out to create this wound for us. It happened. It's because, in case y'all haven't noticed, we're all imperfect. And I know some of you that comes a shock to, but it is true. We're all imperfect, and in our imperfection, we will wound people in our lives. And so involving them in this is part of a process to address our wound. And the other thing, and this, I was helping a friend recently who's dealing with a wound and trying to figure out how to face his wound. And the way that he addressed or has been coping with his wound was through drug addiction. And one of the things that we talked about and with this friend is, if you really want to deal with this, you've got to consider any possibility, anything that might need to happen, which may include a lot of pain. I know for me, sitting down with my parents and having this conversation was very painful because the emotions and everything there. And then as I discovered that they really didn't know, that made it even harder. But we have to consider any possibility to address this wound that occurs in our life. Now, although quite often with this wound, we are more a victim than not, okay? But there may be that something related to this is that something that we own, something we need to say, okay, I contributed to this somehow, whatever that looks like. Many times that's not the case, but remember, we have to consider any possibility. And if there is anything there that we were contributor, we need to own it. And this is another part that's really hard. You know, for quite often for many years, this pain, these emotions have been stowed. They've been packed down and hidden. Well, as we begin to address this wound, we have to experience that pain again. We have to face that pain, feel that pain, and in such a way that it will really be hard. But if we don't do it, we'll continue to never address it because we didn't address it when it happened, and it may come out in different ways, and we've got to really address it. What's really interesting is, again, this is an emotional pain, and some of us cope with it with other emotions. And that's why you see people that are wounded and their reaction is with anger, hate, frustration, other emotions that are considered more acceptable than deal with the original emotion. But we have to open it up, deal with it, and feel it. So how do we move forward? Because we've been stuck there, we got to move forward. Well, one of the biggest pieces, and this is something in our culture today that is hard because it's not culturally popular, excuse me, is there's a single word. It's called forgive. It's a very hard word because we feel justified in holding on to these things. But we need to consider forgiving. And it's not one-sided. As we move forward, we've got to be willing to forgive the person that is the center of this wound. Okay. And what's even harder is sometimes we have to forgive them even though they haven't asked for it or may not deserve it. But we need to be willing to forgive. And we quite often have to forgive others who may not have been directly involved. Remember, we're talking family. And the question would be, why did my brother, my sister, my other parent not protect me from this? And we have to be willing to forgive those people as well. Again, they may not even know it, they may not ask, but we have to deal with that forgiveness. And the other part, and this is something that is really makes this whole thing kind of difficult, is we've got to forgive ourselves. Okay, because as we open this up and experience that pain, it's part of what we're going to be doing is, why didn't I deal with it then? Why did I not address it sooner? And have our own form of guilt. So we've got to forgive ourselves in this process. Very important, because if we aren't willing to forgive, then it's going to be hard to move forward, because we're going to hold on to it, and it's going to hold on to it's going to hold on to us, and we're going to hold on to it. So the other part as we move forward, okay, part of dealing with this is that we begin to get a more real picture of that pain and emotion. And so we have to let that unfold and begin to question, is this emotion, are these responses really us? And they're quite often they're not. They are an out of proportion response to something that we never dealt with. And what we begin to do is we have to process that pain, the original pain, with a better perspective, a clearer understanding, and therefore deal with that. And we have to then go, okay, I've been walking around with this pain stowed and in my box and covered and everything, and now it's open. How do I begin to replace the narrative that was developed when we were hurt? Because that's the narrative that many of us play over in the back of our mind for a lot of years, that affects how we have developed and learned to deal with things. So we have to begin to change that narrative in light of the truth. In my case, my narrative was, I can't do it. I'm not good enough. And what I had to, and part of this process, again, I was fortunate to deal with my parents, and in particular, my dad, about what happened that day. And he said, I had no idea. He said, I never intended to cause that pain. It was not an intentional ignoring you or not speaking to you. So now I go forward with the truth of intent and began to process it and move forward. So I have to start changing that narrative. The other thing is, for some of us, that we still say, oh, I shouldn't have experienced that pain. It was not legitimate. No, it was very legitimate. Was it valid? Who knows? But we have to legitimize it. We have to say, this really is. This is real. It really happened. And I felt it then, but I managed to put it aside. And now I got to face it, and it's real. And that's going to take time. This process, by the way, is not a once and done and everybody feels better at all. It takes time. And you begin to process the original pain so that as new pains come our way, because they're going to, part of what triggers this is those experiences. And what we began to do is grow and learn and heal and how to respond in a more healthy fashion, especially in those situations that would normally trigger it. Now, what's real ironic, and back to my wound and my story, is that because I was able to start the healing process, my relationship to Ed changed. And it wasn't because Ed did anything different. Part of what I had to realize is it wasn't him that was the problem. It was me and what I was experiencing inside. By the time I left that job, because I ultimately left it, and in part because my wound had impacted my job negatively. But by the time I left, what was the beauty of it? Ed and I became very good friends. And he was probably one of the hardest one at that job to say goodbye to, because I began to be able to relate to Ed from a healthy place rather than driven by this wound. So that was a great part of this. So
I'm sorry to interrupt, Kevin. I am absolutely mesmerized by your talk. We've really ran quite some over, but do you just want to just say another sentence or two and then I'll come in?
Sure. I'm sorry. I get long-winded and a little passionate about it sometimes. Okay.
Brilliant.
Move forward, forgive, and then get a new context. Change the narrative that we share with a healthy narrative rather than that place of pain.
Thank you very much indeed. Absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.
So original, unique. I love it. And I definitely want to talk to you about the women and the noodles and the spaghetti, sorry. Definitely.
Well, there's a book out there if people want to get the book.
All right. Okay. We'll put a link
Okay.
when this goes out and we do all the magic
Sure.
with it. Just make sure you provide it for us and we'll make sure we can
Sure.
direct people to your book for sure. So we really only have a couple of minutes, and I know Professor Jagdish is here as well, but I want to ask one question, and then Professor, if you would like to make a comment or ask. The question is, what was the narrative you changed from not being good enough?
Say that again.
So you talked about changing the narrative.
Right.
You had a narrative that you kept telling yourself you weren't good enough, nobody listens to you, all the things that you've said in the talk today. What was the change in your narrative? What did you change it to?
Change in my narrative. I realize now I am good enough. I have value because I am a created being. And I stopped having to prove that value to anyone, and especially those that triggered that feeling in me. So the narrative is, I have value, not because of me, not because of them or anything else, because I'm a created human being, and therefore I don't have to prove my value.
I love it. Absolutely a great mantra. Professor Jagdish, do you like to ask Kevin something?
First of all, thank you very much, Dr. Kevin sir. It's always so nice, and there's so much of learning in listening to you. And
Thank you.
the way you share your personal experiences, I think we relate to them because most of the male population must have gone through most of them. And only thing I would like to add here is, especially with regard to emotional pain felt by male adults. You see, there is a social stigma that it is unmanly to be emotional. So our society right from beginning teaches us that, oh, don't cry like a girl, don't cry like a
Mhm.
woman. So that is something which puts additional stress on male population.
Right.
That you have, even though you are emotional, but you are supposed to hide it. You are supposed to control it,
Keep the
and
box tight.
keep the box tight. And those sometimes you have to act in such a way which you feel emotionally not correct, but you have to prove you are a man, so you have to act like that. So
Sorry to interrupt, but Professor Jagdish and Kevin, Voices of Strength in this summit, and what the other work that we'll be doing around this. This is why I'm putting such longevity on this project, because most people would just finish with a book. But no, because I believe you men are the trailblazers. I'm going to get emotional now. I believe your men voices need to be resounding across the globe, because you are the change makers, the trailblazers, the, oh, whatever word that inspires you, fires that passion. Because what we've heard today and yesterday and what's still to come is exactly why what not we, you, what men have been told in the past is a pack of lies. We now know that. And you have found courage and vulnerability and the strength to raise that voice and rise above the parapet and say, look, you can be so powerful if only you connect within, you forgive yourself, you wound, you strive for excellence, all the things. I mean, it's amazing. You know, that book and all the men, there's a similarity, but the stories are so different. They're so different. Anyway, we do really need to end. We've ran over 10 minutes, but never mind.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. We can come back again and continue the narrative. And because, you know what, we're going to change the narrative. You know, my job is to give you platforms and support you from a woman's perspective. But I'm right behind you because I feel it's time. We just need to look around the world. It's time for men to open up that box and deal with it, because because until we do, we won't have peace in the world.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm going to finish with. So everybody, I hope you've enjoyed this. Please reach out to Kevin, to Professor Jagdish, to all the men in the summit, Voices of Strength Summit, and there's more to come. And we will be replaying these stories over and over again until you finally hear the message of these amazing men in Voices of Strength. So everybody, I'll be seeing you in 10 minutes with a new speaker. And so remember, be brilliant and much love. Until the next time. To the pit. Thank you very much, Kevin. Thank you. Sorry to cut you short. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.